As budget director, he's the lead author of the city's March and June budget messages, oversees departmental proposals, and engages with the community and public interest sector on budget-related issues. Prior to working for the mayor's office, Stephen completed a 2-year residential fellowship at Codex, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics, where he researched government and law enforcement use of facial recognition and surveillance. He was also a member of the Day One Project's Technology Policy Accelerator cohort and was most recently published in the Oxford Handbook of AI Governance, which is, I'm sure they can't even write that fast enough to keep up with everything. Turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So great to be here today. Thank you all for attending. As Cheryl said, my name is Stephen Caines. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and Budget Director for the City of San Jose. And it's such an honor to be here at the Silicon Valley Leadership Symposium. I'm a lawyer, public servant, legal technologist, technology policymaker, and academic. The title of Chief Innovation Officer is relatively new in the civic context. I'm only the 4th person to hold this role. The first one was in Mayor Sam Liccardo's term in 2016, and the role was originally devised to specifically address the needs of digital inclusion in San Jose. So thinking about how can we get devices, access points, and also literacy lessons in the hands of those who are underconnected in our city. And I've been able to serve in 2 mayoral administrations, so the current mayor is Mayor Matt Mahan. I'm also the first Chief Innovation Officer to also serve as Budget Director as well. On the innovation side, I leveraged my experience to optimize city services, through transportation pilots, through things such as our object detection pilot. I also develop and advance through responsible use of technology through different policies, such as the overall privacy policy for the city, and also protocols for specific technologies like automated license plate readers. I advance our ecosystem of best practices through our GovAI coalition that Cheryl mentioned, which is amassed over 500 public agencies in our first year, and I also help promote economic development through partnerships with incubators, startups, and also the local university here in San Jose. On the budget side, I serve as the lead author for the annual March and June budget messages, which are essentially how the mayor directs city staff to think about complex issues of service delivery. And so essentially helps the departments guide what to put in the proposed budget and exactly what proportion. I also help representing the mayor's office in deliberations with our council colleagues on things like housing and homelessness as an example. And since I'm proud to say I've taken this role, last year we had a $53 million structural shortfall, but we were able to resolve that, and we had no layoffs in our 7,000 employees, so we're all very proud of that collective action. But for my remarks today, I wanted to provide you with some guidance on how you can identify and execute upon a career path that provides you fulfillment and the chance to make a difference in public service. In my time as an academic and civil servant, I've been able to directly supervise over 12 students or recent graduates as either interns or full-time students. And then through programming at Stanford Law School, I've been able to help devise programs for over 100 students in their law, engineering, and business schools. So I'm very committed to seeing you all thrive, and I'm very happy to be in this position to where I can kind of pass it forward in that sense. One thing I just want to quickly start off with acknowledging is that you're advancing your education and entering adulthood at a very interesting time in U.S. history where there's a lot of uncertainty. And I want to say that my empathy for you runs very deeply in the sense that I graduated high school a few years after the 2008 housing crash, and then I entered law school in 2016 while living in Florida. So using your imaginations, I've been saying that I've been in a similar position with some of the pressures and challenges that you're all facing. But I want to first just start off with a message of hope that I'm really impressed with the level of just talent and dedication your professors, the administrators, and the deans at this school really have. I think San Jose State is a really special place, and I'm really also given hope by, I think, the amount of specific democratization of resources and technologies that are available to you all just with the single click of a mouse specifically. And so all of that to say, the topic of this conversation is how to find your North Star using a multidisciplinary approach. So the first thing I want to suggest to you all is the benefit of the process of elimination as applied to internships and experiential learning. And so I'm a very big proponent that college is not just about confirming your beliefs, but it's also about confronting your perceptions of disciplines that you may have either mixed or even sometimes negative feelings about. And so some of my greatest learnings have frankly been exposing myself to the things that I think I would not like just based off previous instincts. And so to give you a specific example of that, I started off undergrad at Case Western University as a pre-med biochem major. Over the course of several years, I learned that I was not really that intrigued about biochemistry. But one thing that I did in my sophomore year was I got a role in a biochemistry lab that was funded by the National Institutes of Health studying HIV RNA. And I think that it was very critical that I did that in my sophomore year because it allowed me to confront the notion, do I want to be in research all of my life? And my own personal assessment was that I found that research was a little bit more isolated than I thought. I found that the learning cycles were often a little bit slow because you need to do, frankly, trials and experiments that run a very long time in that sense. And I found that some of the nuances of academia did not necessarily be my cup of tea, but I think that it's great that I had that learning my sophomore year because I was able to readjust and find the path that worked for me. And so for me, what that resolution looked like was actually been transferring out of Case Western and going to school at UCF in Orlando, because I realized if I wanted to do chemistry, or I should stay in Cleveland, if I wanted to do something else, there were other schools and other opportunities that would be a lot more beneficial to me. The other example that I'll offer you though is when I was in law school, my first ever internship was doing juvenile delinquency defense in Florida. And so what that looks like is representing kids charged with crimes in Miami-Dade, and we saw everything from petty theft to homicide, so it was an extremely illuminating season of my life. And even before I went into criminal law, I had a sense that this would be a little bit too much for me, and the sense that it was like children honestly took everything essentially times 100, because when you try to explain the concept of time and consequences to them, they don't have the same frame of reference that we do. And so for me, that summer was like really spending multiple days in court, writing depositions, speaking with police officers. I would often even go to jail visits as well to do interviews in the Juvenile Delinquency Center. And so the benefit, I think, of seeing that now and being able to speak, I think, intelligently about things that affect criminal justice reform is that I've seen the conditions in jails. I've also been able to know how in a lot of these criminal justice situations, the kid might come in for, let's say truancy or theft, but really there's often an underlying set of issues that are contributing to that person's current state. And so I think having a holistic approach to criminal justice and thinking about preventative measures is something that I really benefited from doing that internship very early on. And so that kind of goes to that notion of confronting what you may not be comfortable with, or things that you might have negative perceptions about. And so that's really the benefit that I got from that. The second thing I'll offer is from a networking tip, something I constantly hear from freshmen and sophomores is that they're often intimidated to go to a lot of these meetings with highly technical people because they feel like they don't know the technology as well. One thing that I want to offer you is that there's the technology itself, but then there's the conversation around the technology. And so what I mean by that is in 2016, I would go to a lot of networking events with technical and legal folks, specifically around Bitcoin and things like that, and the blockchain as a whole. And I realized that, the underlying technology, you can wrap your mind around that easily, but there's always a new shifting focus, almost like a monthly concern. At the time, one thing that was really big was, should we have Bitcoin ATMs? And in terms of a point of transfer, where do people need this based on the amount of people that are consuming using crypto in a certain jurisdiction, right? And so often what I find is just a quick little networking hack, especially early on in your career, is frankly just asking these more senior people, not necessarily a deep technical question, but saying, hey, I saw the news that there are these two positions on this issue, which one do you think is more persuasive? And so realizing that there's the underlying technology, but there's a conversation around the technology. And the policy conversations are honestly easier to enter if you don't have, honestly, a full technical background. So I'd advise that as a good tip as to how you can network with highly technical people. The next point is, I think, really around connecting the dots in your narrative. So whether this is explaining who you are and why you're pursuing your career of research, or if it's submitting your application to go to grad school or beyond and things like that, it's very important to be able to own your narrative. And I think that oftentimes when we look at people in, like, let's say the position of myself, it's easy to think that it was a linear path and I always knew what I was going to do, but that wasn't the case at all. And so for me, really what it was is that I went from being pre-med to pre-law with a focus on patents, to pre-law with a focus on IP and entertainment law, to technology policy and regulation, to ultimately to government. And so it's a little bit of a wayward path, but keep in mind that as long as you're pursuing things that you truly care about and you can justify as to why within your worldview that matters, I think that there's an extreme benefit to that. I just want to really drive home that at this stage in your life, reinvention is your right, and I really want to hammer that home. Reinvention is your right. If you want to devise a new path, pick a new field of study, or find a new angle to view your preferred discipline, that is absolutely your right, and you should take that upon yourself. I know that oftentimes there may be other pressures, whether it's family, society, or other things that tell you you have to commit to the path that you're on, but it's only you that has to live with your kind of choices and decisions in that sense, and so I really advise you to, if you're not in the right environment, pick up and move and go to a new place where you can find that fulfillment. I also want to say that in terms of my narrative, like as I view myself today, in the overarching theme, I think of it as harnessing the pro-social power of technology to advance public interest organizations, but also ensuring safeguards and harm reduction procedures are in place for disruptive technologies. And so I think in this world, you're kind of forced often to think pro or con on certain issues, but you can balance both sides of the equation. You can also pursue implementation of technology, but also ensure that there are adequate safeguards. You don't have to choose one side of the fence. So I want to make sure that you have that kind of a global perspective. And so, going forward on that notion of knowing your narrative and being able to speak to a wide variety of topics, I'll give you the story that I gave at my law school admins essay that I think is pretty formative. So I started off with a very simple premise, which was dinner was always a very important thing in my household. And so there was one day where my father, he worked for medical device companies. And so one of them was Boston Scientific, and they made cardiac stents, which essentially helps open up your valves and arteries should they be collapsing due to plaque or some other issue. And so he was talking about how his company devised this new stent, and he kind of talked about the metrics as to why it was better than anything on the market. And just 2 years later, my sister, who's a cardiac surgeon, was using my dad's product specifically in surgery in patients. And so I wrote about how as a teenager, that was super fascinating to me, how something that was discussed at my dinner table was now in mass production and saving lives. And so it kind of got me on the field of intellectual property and the idea how good ideas are not just made, they have to be shepherded from the lab to market. And failures, when it's not shepherded correctly, mean that the inventor does not get their just rights in terms of the things that they brought to market and can often harm them in future things that they're trying to design into the market. And so I really kind of tie that together, how an observation as a child shaped me into identifying the field of intellectual property as something that I saw as personally valuable. So I wanted to share that tidbit for some of you who may be specifically thinking about that next step and really have to package what is often a very complex life into a very neat narrative, really. So that's really what worked for me. The next thing I want to focus on is really the value proposition of being the first or a few taking on bold challenges early on in your career. Just to give you a few highlights for me, when I frankly jumped face first into something I wasn't even fully sure what it was at the moment, was there was a program called the Access to Justice Technology Fellowship at my law school that had just started. And so they took students and placed them in legal aid organizations and gave them the challenge of thinking from a systems perspective, how can you help this organization and ultimately the clients? And just to define the contrast here, many lawyers work in what's known as direct client service, where there's like a one-to-one relationship with you and your client. Systems design, though, are essentially supporting the lawyers on the front line by employing technology to help them have a greater impact. And so for me, when I did that fellowship, I was able to build an online intake system using a no-code platform that expanded online intake of potential clients for the legal services of Greater Miami. And so you could apply 24/7 in different languages, and you could also do case referrals to share between different trusted organizations. And so the benefit of that, aside from the clear accessibility, was that I realized just working at LSGMI, that people frankly get re-traumatized often the more times you make them tell a story. And so I think having empathy and being able to do a very clear intake and then making it so you're reducing friction for those seeking legal services is immensely helpful. And so just to give a little extra context, the legal services of Greater Miami is one of the largest legal aids in Florida, and specifically they help with a wide variety of issues from housing to tax issues, small business development, and things like that, and even medical debt along the lines and things along that line. So they were called to do a lot of things. The second thing was my law school was actually one of the first to offer concentrations in JD. So I could say that I have a concentration in the business of aviation, law, and technology. And so that was super helpful when I started looking for jobs because it was a simple differentiator. And you should always be asking yourself, how can you differentiate yourself among the hundreds of other people that are graduating at your same time? And so even though there was a little bit of extra course load that I had to take on, years later, I can promise you that that had an immense value. So leaping whenever your university decides to really create those divergent career paths is extremely helpful. And then finally, a little bit more of a modern example. When I joined Mayor Mahan's office, I was offered the invitation to interview for his office. He asked me if I also wanted to do budget as well. And that was kind of a huge ask for me, frankly, because I don't have any formal financial training. And to take a quick step back, we have 2 budget directors in the city of San Jose. One person sits on the city manager's side. That person is a real accountant, has 10 people underneath them managing all the funds. My role in the mayor's office, because our city charter is what governs the city procedures, it directs the mayor to lead the budget process. It's one of the few powers we have in the weak mayor system. And so what that means is he needs someone who's specifically meeting with the other budget director, meeting with the councils to develop those ratios of, let's say, affordable to interim housing. I also meet with community groups, so if anybody ever has requested money from the mayor's office, you've likely met with me or my team, and we process that kind of request. And so we need someone on the mayor's side to advocate, also preparing for presentations and things like that. And so it was absolutely intimidating because of that, but I work with a really great team, and frankly, whenever I go to conferences, people often tell me, innovation and budget, how does that work together? What's that interplay look like? And I think that has given me such a unique view into the city and how it operates that I never would have had I just stood in innovation. So even though finance was not anything that was really on my monopoly board in my head of what I wanted to do, there was an extreme benefit in diving face forward, especially with such a large city as San Jose. So I'm so glad. So that highlights, I think, the importance of being first or the few to do something. The other thing that I'll tie to this is something that I did, which is called the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative in law school. And so they combated cyber sexual harassment. And so they did that through legislative means. We worked with state legislatures to pass bills criminalizing revenge porn and other type of online cyber abuse. Work with companies like Twitter on technology like photo hashing, so that slows the spread of sensitive material by creating a hash of the sensitive photo, so it doesn't reproduce it in other areas, but it gives you essentially a frame that you can compare to, and it prevents the upload of subsequent materials. And then I also worked to present directly to first responders, because at the time, police were not always giving the best advice if someone was being stalked online. So making sure that people, when they go to these centers and these people, that they're able to get the resources that they need. And the thing about the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative is when I was doing it my first year in law school, I was the only person doing it for that first semester. And I had all my friends doing things like investment clinic and health law clinic, and I was thinking, man, am I really doing the right thing? But then I realized I was just early. And the next semester, 5 people, 3 of them who were my friends, joined. And so sometimes you're just early to the party. And so just because you don't look to your left and right and see people that are at the exact same stage engaging, doesn't mean that it's not a good idea and the value proposition isn't there. So I always want to encourage you to do that as well. The next thing I think that's important is like really doing more than what's asked. And I think that we've all heard the phrase like average effort gets average results. And I think it's easy to think about that in the context of, oh, just work harder at the things that are being given to me. But I would like to take that a step further and say, you should be doing things on your own for your own advancement that maybe no one at the university is telling you to do. And for me, what that looked like was teaching myself to code in Python and R when I was a law student. And that was not a class, no one ever charged me to do that. And my vision was never to become a full stack developer. Had never had that vision. I wanted to have informed conversations with developers and be able to ask them, why did they make certain decisions, and really interrogate some of their decisions on a higher level. Because I saw that a lot of law students were number one scared of math, statistics, and numbers. And so I figured if I could get some type of wisdom there, that I could really leverage that in the future. And so for me, specifically learning to code so I could become conversant and fluent, but not necessarily proficient to making full stack applications, really brought a lot of strong value to my life. The next thing specifically I would say is determine what your first priority is when you're looking for jobs in the sense. And so for me, when I was in 2019, I thought it was money. It wasn't actually money. It was actually autonomy. And in many ways, I kind of view myself as an artist, and I really like that space to be able to execute. I appreciate that if my supervisor, whoever is my boss, is giving me, this is the end game I want to get to, but for me, I really like that ability to be able to kind of craft my own solutions and try different things. I like the notion of, if I see something on the news that I want to react to from a policy perspective, I can do that. There's nothing prohibiting me from reacting in real time. And so for me, really just being able to address like what's your number one priority as you're looking for these positions will give you a really clear view and allow you to get that flexibility. My final point before I'll go to exactly what I do present day is around the fact that your future career may not exist yet in name. And what I mean by that is that when I was working at the Legal Services Greater Miami, I got a job offer to stay there after graduation. And my supervisor, she was the chief innovation officer of the legal aid organization at the time, she asked me, Stephen, like, what would you like specifically for this role? And I was like, I don't really see anything on the org chart that I think accurately reflects what this job is. And she's like, oh, you can name your own role. And so I came up with the title of Legal Solutions Architect because I'd seen it just one place online before, and I thought it really encapsulated having a legal mind, but almost a technical mind as to how we improve the legal system. And so that was something that I thought was really impressive, and now Legal Solutions Architect is like a bona fide role that you can find in other places. And so all that to say, sometimes you might get dismayed when you go on LinkedIn and nothing really looks like you, but know that oftentimes the need exists. These powers that be just haven't created the job description yet. And so often you may be looking for something that may not exist in that time, but again, you can be the first person to really step into that role. So I really want to encourage you all to think about that. Before I close, I just wanted to give you a little bit more of an insight as what does my day-to-day look like as an innovation officer currently. I mentioned the Digital Inclusion Fund, which is something I also worked on. And so to give you an overall sense, there was a report in 2017 that found 1 in 10 San Jose residents is underconnected. And so the then mayor, Sam Ricardo, got philanthropic dollars. He also worked out an agreement with the telcos, the telecommunications companies, that a certain percentage of the 5G cell deployments, when you see those on poles, a certain percentage of that revenue goes towards digital inclusion. And then my team also developed other kind of forms of new revenue, such as an e-refurbishment model where we worked with local suppliers in San Jose, specifically when their office equipment reached end of life. We would work with a company like ServiceNow to refurbish it and then direct those funds back to the community as an example. And so we've done about 5 rounds of the Digital Inclusion Fund where we work with local groups who are already in the community. We give them funds to deliver devices, access points, and literacy lessons. So those are our 3 points of adoption, and now the program has moved to San Jose Public Library. In terms of digital privacy, I was able to not only help hire the first digital privacy officer and several key roles like the equities and data lead, but I also helped develop the overall privacy policies and these specific protocols for various things as well. And that's been just immensely beneficial because I was able to use my research at Stanford in a real setting, which is super exciting to have that applied. The GovAI Coalition was started in fall of 2023, and so that is over 500 public agencies coming together to work on civic issues. And so the first phase of this was all about procurement, and it recognized the frustration that, frankly, a lot of people in my position just often are not able to verify what's on the screen when we're getting pitched 2 to 3 companies a day. The volume of requests is just a very hard problem to crack. And so we created things like a vendor AI fact sheet, which is like a nutrition label for AI models. So it tells public officials like myself exactly what questions to ask, so you can actually gauge whether that deployment and that technology is right for you and your community. As another example, we have an AI policy manual, which is built off the things that we've adopted. And the benefit is that if you don't have an innovation officer or privacy officer, let's say you're a small city, you can adopt this policy and amend it as needed. So we're creating these pre-made forms that organizations can readily embrace to be able to move quickly. We also have things like an incident response plan, because we know not all days will be sunny. So I think making sure that you have steps in place to have notification requirements to who might be impacted, and then also key decision makers who have control over the system is very vital. So we're also thinking about contingencies in that sense. So what's really exciting is now that we're in phase 2 of the coalition, we're moving a little bit more into action. So to give you an example, City of San Jose is a very diverse place. We have the largest overseas Vietnamese population in the world. So anytime we communicate as a city government, we have to do it in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. We found that if you take Google's base algorithm, you combine our years of training data, we actually outperform the model on certain assessments. And the exciting part about that is we thought a lot of cities have these like ethnic populations that they have to be responsible for communicating with. So we created an open data portal where cities are now pulling their training data, and we're actually working on like a fundamental model for AI translation for government, because the way that government communicates, whether it might be the way we talk about emergencies and things like that, there are certain nuances that may not be captured by the general model. So we're working together to build connective tissue between these jurisdictions and to pull resources together. And hopefully the end state of this is that we can actually use this for collective action. Because if a lot of cities, hundreds of cities can get together and say, we want X, Y, and Z in our contracts, we will have a lot stronger of a bargaining position against major companies. So collective action specifically in the context of local government is another major thing that we're looking out for. The next thing I'd like to highlight is our object detection pilot, so we're attaching cameras to city fleet vehicles to try to identify potholes. And also road obstructions. We just received a grant for $260,000 from the Toyota Ventures Foundation to do phase 2 of this pilot. So we're really excited to try to, again, identify road obstructions more quickly, and then hopefully plug that into 311. I want to give a quick shout out to our IT director, Khaled Tawfiq. On the first month I met him, he was like, Steven, 311 is a manual service and it shouldn't be like that. He was saying that the city should be able to proactively identify these issues, and we should be able to get to them before you have to whip out your phone and manually report them. So I want to give kudos to him for really being able to bring this vision to life. The next thing is around AI translation, which is something we've all heard about. We integrated a pilot with Wordly, so now if you go to any of our council meetings, you'll see an automatic translation in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And so the exciting part about that is that we've seen a 370% increase in our Spanish viewership since we've done that, which suggests that creating access points for people, especially non-native English speakers, can really increase democratic participation. So we're really glad that we're making society much more welcoming to those who English may be their second language. And then the final thing I'll really close on is a little bit more of this event space. And so we have an event series called San Jose Innovates, where we have local innovators come and meet at local AI companies. So the most recent one we had was at Coactive. Some of you may know them. They are a Series B $200 million valuation AI company here in our downtown. They specifically work on using AI to tag media content, specifically with metadata. And so it was really great to have it there. And then we're also having our first ever GovAI Coalition conference in a few weeks, December 4th through 6th here at the San Jose Convention Center. And it's already sold out with 500 attendees. So really excited about that. So I hope all that gives you a little bit of a picture of what does a Chief Innovation Officer actually do. That's often the first question I get, so I hope that adds a little bit more color. And as we close, I'd like to just, number one, again, praise the San Jose State community. You really have world-class professors here. You have really great groups like the Ideas Lab and also the Sparta Incubator. You have really caring professors such as Professor Yu Chen, Ahmed Baba, for one, here. And also just the AI for Social Good movement here at the Digital Human Rights Center. And also the forthcoming AI Civic and Social Good Center, which we're currently building and working on. So hopefully the next year you all hear some more about that. But really excited to operate a joint center with the city and the university hand in hand. And so, as we close, I just want to say, as the world becomes more increasingly complex, I hope these suggestions can help you attune your inner compass to a direction that you personally and also your community can be proud of. And just remember, while things may not get easier, you will get better. So with that, I close.